All right, so tonight we're talking about the good, and this is part 2 of a 7-lecture series that is looking at what are the key ideas that give our lives meaning. And I'm not taking these ideas because I think they're the ideas that have given my life meaning, although they have. They're the ideas that keep recurring. If we look at old tradition of continual conversation in what we often name as Western civilization, as a civilization that begins with the Greeks and Hebrews and then continues really all over the world up into today's society. And so I just want to give, in some ways, kind of an introduction to these ideas. And tonight's idea is the good. And so I want to start with just asking this question: what do we mean when we call something good? And there's a number of different things we mean, because we use the word in so many different ways. This is one of the things that makes this the very idea confusing, is I'll tell my dog, oh, that's a good dog, because he does something that I like. Now, like if he does something I don't like jumping up on the couch, then he's a bad dog. And I'm not meaning anything objective. I'm just saying, yes, I like that, or I don't like that. Or I say, this is a good cup of coffee. I like it. And I'm not saying anything else. I'm also not even saying that you should like it. I'm just reporting what I think. Another thing that we do when we talk about something being good is we rank it according to some kind of scale. So we might say, for example, well, is this a good room for this lecture? Well, yeah, it's a lot better than the one down the hall because that one only fits 15 people, right? I'm comparing it to some kind of outside standard by which we evaluate something, and we do this all the time. Would this be a good car to buy? Yeah, like Consumer Reports ranks it really high for reliability. I'm appealing to some kind of standard by which we measure it and compare it to better or worse. But there's also another kind of use of the word good. I remember my grandpa near the end of his life. Here he is with a really advanced stage of emphysema. He's got rheumatoid arthritis. He can hardly use his hands. He's in pain all the time. And I come over to visit him one day. It was after school. And I ask him what he's doing. And he says, oh, I've been thinking back about my life. And he says, it's been a good life. And I think, he wasn't comparing that to any kind of objective standard. He wasn't even saying that he likes all of it. He's just affirming it. He's just saying yes to life. And lots of times when we use the word good, what we mean to do is just affirm something. And there's even here's another example. Sometimes somebody will get some really disappointing news, and you'll ask them how they're doing, and they'll say, "Oh, it's all good." Like they're just saying yes to whatever happens, whatever life offers. It's all good. So we have this kind of use of the word. Now, in this kind of use of the word, I think what we're alluding to is a deeper sense that when we call something good, we're saying that it's substantial, that it really matters. And I want to illustrate that by a story that I heard this summer. I reconnected with some old friends that I hadn't seen for a couple of years, and they told me the story of something that had happened to them over the summer. Their daughter, who's in her mid-20s, had just gotten engaged. They liked this young man. He's really very nice young man. He's got a good job, all of that. But he hasn't had a lot of life experiences. He's got a job in computers. That's how he spends most of his day. And they thought it would be really good to take him out kayaking. He's never done that sort of thing. So they go kayaking on a local river. And it turns out the water's running a lot higher and faster than they had expected. And they come around a bend. They aren't too far along in the trip. They come along a bend, and the couple's name, Greg and Lori, Greg is out ahead. Lori is the second one, and she's kind of on the left side of the group. They come around this bend, and there's a tree line down across the river, and she can't get out of its way. Her front of her kayak hits it, swings it around, and flips it over, and she goes under. Now, if you've ever been canoeing or kayaking on a river, you know that this is a really dangerous situation. And one of the things that makes it so dangerous is if you go under, the branches below the tree keep you from going under, but the force of the water keeps you from coming back up. So she's wearing a life preserver, and she knows exactly the situation she's in. She knows she's only got a very short time to get out. She's trying to reach up above her head, but she can't grab onto anything solid. Greg is downstream paddling up as fast as he can, but knows that he's not going to be able to get back in time. And all of a sudden, a hand grabs her wrist and yanks her up out of the river. And it's this young man who'd never been kayaking before. And he had had the foresight to just jump out of his kayak right away, grab onto that tree, and scoot over to where he'd saw her go under and just start reaching down, found her hand, and pulled her up. So it takes some 2 or 3 hours to get their stuff, get all their gear out to the bank, walk back to the car, get the stuff loaded, and drive back home. And they're sitting at the kitchen table hours later processing all of that. And Greg and Lori, they're both in tears, trying to just kind of finally settle down enough to realize what had happened. And this young man keeps repeating the phrase, "I was useful. I was useful." And you do wonder, how does somebody get to this point of having lived a quarter century and not had the feeling that they've done anything useful, right? But also, what I think he was saying by this is, what I did really matters. It's not just something I like. It's not just something that's important to me. It really matters. I did something important that really matters. And I think this is what we mean by the good. He did something good. His life counts for something. So, I think this is significant. And it connects with what we were talking about last time when we were talking about the truth. And if you remember, I talked about the importance not just of knowing things that are true, but of living one's life in such a way that one does the truth. We do the truth. It's an attitude towards life. And I believe that this attitude towards life is an attitude that requires us to turn towards what is real. This is what it is to do the truth. It means I have an orientation towards the real in such a way that I'm connected to what matters. This is what it means to call something true. It's grounded in reality. And this requires that we reject 3 very common orientations towards life that are not oriented towards the truth, not oriented towards what is real or good. And the first is narcissism. And you hear about this plenty, but narcissism is just an attitude that comes from the daily habit of only attending to our own needs and interests. And when you develop that as a habit of only attending to your own needs and interests and not attending to the needs or interests of other people and considering them as something that matters, pretty soon what happens is that your world shrinks. And you begin to think of that, well, it really is all about me, my desires and my interests. And you can tell when you're talking about somebody who's a narcissism because the conversation keeps coming back to what they think, what they want, what they're doing or have done. And they don't ask questions about how you are doing or what you're doing or other things in the world. They just keep talking about the same thing because their world has shrunk. And this is narcissism. It's not a belief. It's an orientation towards the world that develops over time. Another is cynicism. I heard somebody say he had a boss recently that told him, if you want to lead this company, you have to realize that people are only motivated by two things: fear and greed. And he says, well, what about love? No, nobody's motivated by love. It's only fear and greed. And this is cynicism. The cynic really thinks it's all about power. Washington is full of cynics. They'll turn any occasion into a discussion about how to leverage fear or greed. It's all about give and take, right? And if you're oriented towards what is real, you're not a cynic, because you know it's not all about fear and greed. Like there is something else besides what people want or what they fear. There's also what is real, what is true. And then there's nihilism. And nihilism is the conviction that nothing matters. That nothing matters at all. Not even fear and greed, really. And everything is hypocrisy. There is no point to anything. And if you've been following some of the discussion about the killing last week of Charlie Kirk, you might have heard his alleged killer described as somebody who fits into a category that the FBI has recently started using: nihilistic violent extremism, right? That is a kind of violence that is done not for the sake of achieving some political end, but only for the sake of sowing chaos, because after all, if nothing matters, but a lot of people think it does, why don't we point out to them just that really nothing matters? Chaos is the state of the world in which it's revealed that nothing matters. And as I said, these orientations aren't chosen. Nobody just reads a book about nihilism and decides, I'm going to be a nihilist. They develop over time. And when we talk about living a life of virtue, what we're talking about is living life in such a day that your actions become habits. Your habits shape the way you see the world, and how you see the world then determines your character. And this can work either positively, like you can gradually become more generous by acting in a generous way, and then you become more habitually generous, and that shapes your perception that when you're generous to people, you form better connections, and other people are doing better, and that's satisfying, and you come to develop a characteristic of generosity. But you can also develop a character trait of nihilism or cynicism or narcissism just by acting in these ways repeatedly. One of the things I've written about quite a bit in my columns is profanity. We have a culture that finds profanity, many people find profanity acceptable, because what they say, well, it's just words. It's just words that you express yourself. And sometimes you have to express yourself in extreme ways to get attention. But see, the problem with profanity is it's not just words, it's not just expressing yourself, it's expressing yourself in a way that is always, say, scatological or sexual, in ways that denigrate people. They make things seem like excrement, or like sexual acts that are animalistic instead of noble or enriching. And so what this does is it distorts people and things. It distorts our perception of things. And anything that distorts the way we see things, so that we don't see things as real, as having a kind of integrity, leads us into in slight ways, into these negative ways of seeing reality that are not good. Not good because they don't reflect what's real. So that's true of profanity, but it's also true of pornography, which distorts the nature of people and the nature of sexual desire. It's true of bullying. It's true of lying, because that's literally a misrepresentation, misrepresenting what we really think or what we know to be true. It's true of manipulation, trying to get people to do something that because we want them to do it, but not respecting the reality or the integrity of their own ability to choose. And it's true of coercion. So just about all the ways that we can think of unethical behavior are ways of distorting the real. And that's why we call unethical behavior not good. It's bad behavior. Bad not because we have rules against it, but because it distorts the nature of the world and the nature of the things in the world and the nature of the most important things in the world, the nature of people and our relationships to them. So when we do the truth, what we are trying to do, we are trying to live in such a way that we honor the integrity of what's real. And when we find people who do that, we say, oh yeah, that's a good person. That's somebody who tells us the truth. Yeah, ask you what you think, and you tell me, and I can rely on it. Okay. And if somebody respects other people, we say, yeah, that's a good person. They respect other people. In other words, they acknowledge the reality of another person's genuine interests and desires outside of their own. So then the question is, well, how do we get to know this? How do we get to know more about the nature of the real? Because isn't everything just real? And Plato has two stories, and I'm gonna summarize them very quickly. If we were in a regular classroom, we would spend a long time on this, but there's two stories I'm going to talk about, and they what they do is well, I'm going to come back to what they do. I'll just tell you what the stories are. The first is the Ring of Gyges. And the Ring of Gyges is a story that's told in Plato's Republic early on when they're questioning the nature of justice. And it's actually in much older stories. It comes originally from Herodotus. So we know that this is a really old story. Herodotus is often called the very first historian. And it's a story of Gyges the shepherd. Gyges is a shepherd. There's an earthquake and a chasm opens up in a crack in the world, and he climbs down in it, and he finds a ring, and he's attracted to the ring. He grabs it, he takes it back, and he's at a campfire that night with some of the other shepherds, and he notices that when he turns the ring inward, nobody pays any attention to him. And he realizes that it makes him invisible. And when he turns the ring back out, people can see him again. And so what does Gyges do? He turns the ring inwards, becomes invisible. He goes to the king's palace. He sneaks in. He kills the king. He takes the queen to his bed, and he becomes a tyrant. He assumes the kingdom, complete control. And here's what Plato says, is the kind of the question that the story brings up. Wouldn't anybody who gets such a ring do the same thing? Because the only reason we treat others well, the only reason we don't take power whenever we can, is because we can't. We don't have the power to do so. But if we had complete power and complete freedom, we would all be like Gyges. And if that story sounds familiar to some of you, you might recognize the Lord of the Rings, right? Tolkien uses the same device, a ring that is created by Sauron, who's the tyrant who wants to control the world, but then it becomes found by a hobbit. And it's interesting, a number of other people in the story refuse to take the ring because they know that they would become a tyrant just like Sauron, but the Hobbit does not. Bilbo doesn't, neither does Frodo. It's also the story that or kind of the theme that is used in some ways in the Harry Potter series, where there is the Sorcerer's Stone, the Elder Wand, and the Cloak of Invisibility, which the three of them together do the same thing. They bestow complete power and complete freedom to whoever possesses. And the question is like, so how does Harry Potter resist the temptation to become Voldemort himself? How does Frodo resist the temptation? And the answer in both of those stories is fascinating. The answer in both of them is they do it by turning to friends. They do it by turning to friends and asking their friends to hold them accountable, which their friends repeatedly do. Right? So this is in some ways the first part of the answer. Like in the Republic, Plato doesn't answer the question, how do you avoid becoming somebody like Gyges? But he answers it later. He answers it not simply by turning to friends, but it involves friends. He answers it with another story called the Allegory of the Cave. And what the Allegory of the Cave is, he says, imagine that there is a room of people and they are prisoners in a dark cave. And so we could imagine that, say we are all like that. We're all, if we're prisoners, if we could imagine that everybody here is chained so that you can't turn your head and you're facing forward towards a wall of the cave. And what you see on the wall of the cave are shadows that are dancing around. And there are people behind you holding up objects, and there's a fire, and the light from the fire is projecting the shadows of these objects up on the wall. But since you can't turn your head around, you can't see the people behind you and the objects, you can just see the shadows. And Plato says, well, if that was the case, what would you think is real? Well, you'd think the shadows are real. And when one of you talks and there's an echo from the cave wall, the sound bounces on the cave wall and comes back, you would imagine that the person talking is the shadow where the echo comes back from. And he says, and what would happen, do you suppose, if somebody came into the cave and released you from your chains and turned you around? And his interlocutor here, Glaucon, says, well, it would be painful at first, right? Because you've been your whole life, you've faced one direction, and all of a sudden somebody's turning you around using muscles that you've never used before and turning you around, and then asks you to look at the real objects, but the first thing you see is the fire itself. And it's so bright that you're blinded by it. Okay. And what if your eyes gradually became accustomed to the light and you're able to see, oh, that the shadows are really caused by these objects and the fire casting, then you would know something you didn't know before. You would know something that is real. But would you be able to convince all the other people who are still sitting there chained that you're looking at something real and they're just looking at shadows? Well, of course not, because they're still only seeing the shadows. And then he says, and then what if that person drags you out of the cave into the daylight? And you see that the fire is not the ultimate source of light. There's the sun, but at first you can't even look directly at the sun. But you see objects in the world, and then you see the sun. And he said, and this story, more than anything else, gives rise to the word that we still use for education. Education, the root word is to lead out. Is out, ducare is to lead. Educare, to educate, is to lead out. This is that education is a process of moving from ignorance, from thinking that you know things, but knowing things that are like reflections or shadows, to seeing the causes of those appearances. So moving from appearances to what is causing the appearances. And this is what he says is the process of education. Now, there's a lot of debate about exactly what Plato means by all of this. But I just want to focus on a couple things for our purposes, partly because of time and partly because I think it's ultimately the most interesting thing about the allegory is not so much like exactly what are the objects in the real world and like what are the shadows and what are they in the world. We can talk about those things. But I think the first thing we notice is the prisoners in the cave need help from others. They don't release themselves in this story. They are released by others. And the process is initially painful. That it involves turning around. Now, the Latin word that we get that starts being used quite a bit after that is conversion. It means convertere, literally to turn together towards something. It also becomes the root of the word conversation. Conversation is to turn together with somebody else. So the fact that we need somebody else's help to turn towards what is real, to turn from the appearance towards what is real, and it's a process of turning together. It's not something we do on our own. It's painful. It's initially blinding. That is, initially we see less than we did before. And it makes one less able to see the shadows. If one then turns back from looking at the fire, then to looking at the wall, and the prisoners want to test you to see if you really know what you're talking about when you say you can see the real things and they're only seeing appearances. And they want to test you by asking you questions about the things they're seeing in the shadows. You're less able to answer those questions than you were before. And you're less able, you're also less interested. You're less interested in playing the games. And then finally, the real's hard to explain to people who haven't seen it for themselves. Like you know the direction of the real, and you can indicate something about the direction and maybe even the path to get out of the cave. But you can't really describe to somebody who hasn't taken that journey what that journey's like. And so this is an important thing about this, what Plato calls the journey towards the good. It is experiential. It is something that we undertake over time as we become more immersed. We journey farther towards the real. But we're always approximate. It's not something that we ever fully grasp. We never have a complete grasp in the sense that we can give somebody a completely adequate definition of the good. What we're able to do is say, it's that way, not that way. It's over there. How do you get there? Well, you take these steps. You start walking this way. You start going this way. And we indicate something about the direction towards the good. And we know it's not in the direction of cynicism or nihilism or narcissism. It's not that way. It's not towards the darkness. It's not towards nothing. It's towards something substantial. It's that way. But we can't be asked to give a definition. It's something that we get closer to. So a few of the conclusions Plato makes then about this is, at the end of telling the story of the allegory of the cave, he says, well, the sun is the good. And the sun is both the source of everything that is. It's the source of life in the world. It's the source of everything, but it also illuminates everything that we know. And so it's both the source of what is and responsible for our very ability to know what is. That we can't find it on our own, that we can't know it completely. And once we know something about the direction that it lies, we have an obligation to help others find it. We have an obligation to help others on the way. This is the last part of the story of the allegory of the cave, is the prisoner who's released doesn't stay up in the world outside, but comes back into the cave to release other prisoners.